All right. Thanks again, everyone, for joining today's LEED Green Associate Study Session. For those, it looked like a couple of people maybe are already on their AP exams. We'll try to answer your questions also, but the focus of this study session will be the LEED Green Associate credential. So I've got just after 2 o'clock Eastern time. Looks like everyone is logging in from different places around the country, some people in DC and Colorado. So really important that we have you guys send in your questions through this question feature on the GoToWebinar software. The Thanks for answering the questions as you registered for this study session. I'm going to start with those. That's kind of my outline to answer those questions you've already asked. But as you registered, we want as many questions as possible. We're actually broadcasting this to YouTube Live also. So anybody on YouTube that has a question, answer those in the leave those in the comments. We're monitoring and we'll try to address your questions as well. So with that being said, let's go ahead and go through the PowerPoint I've got. Again, any and all questions are very welcome. So shoot those over in your question uh, area on your software. I'll show you here. If you look over here, there's a section for questions where you can enter them in, and we'll be referencing back to those over the next hour. So I am Michael Cichetti, Director of Sales here at GBES. GBES has been helping people pass and maintain LEED credentials since 2007. Now we're also helping folks with the WELL AP exam. It's growing quite rapidly and is poised to be very popular like LEED. LEED is the #1 green building rating system. It's in hundreds of countries. There's thousands of projects. There's actually 2 million square feet of LEED certified buildings every day. So happy to see that everyone around the world is focusing on green building and trying to be more sustainable. Um, and so now we're talking about LEED version 4. This is the fourth version of LEED. Every few years, um, they try to raise the bar at the USGBC, the nonprofit organization behind LEED, and make it a more strenuous but more sustainable program through different iterations. So every 4 or 5 years, LEED updates. Again, we're on the fourth version. So right here on this graph, this is just not really for the exam, but just for your general knowledge here. You can see a line showing we're kind of in the middle of LEED V4 now. And the goal is, so zero impact, that's kind of my true definition of sustainability. Um, where um, the resources aren't depleted at all. Currently, even the highest level of LEED buildings, some of them maybe are net positive, creating more energy on site, or even filtering more water and not using any resources. But that's a few. In next iterations of LEED, we want to raise the bar even more so that maybe our gold buildings are zero impact and net positive. So we're moving that way, and just mentioning that some folks have maybe studied for version 3 a few years ago and are just now picking up on the studies. Don't worry, not a ton has changed, maybe 15%. All the main concepts are the same though, and the LEED Green Associate exam is a pretty general test, so you're in good shape. And going forward, we all want to be studying for LEED version 4, using LEED version 4 materials. Um, just a little bit more overview before we get into the questions. Again, keep those coming in the question section of this GoToWebinar software. You can see from version 2009, that was version 3, the previous version. Some of the programs have been moved around, but essentially this is just a good snapshot of all the different main credentials and rating systems. So for the LEED Green Associate exam, 80% of the questions are going to be about new construction, this BD plus C group, all these different rating systems. It's, when you're building a building out from the ground up, how do we do it sustainably? and so the building uses less energy and water than maybe traditional buildings. Um, the other 20% is probably going to be, focused on some operations and maintenance concepts. So we need to, for the Green Associate, we kind of need to learn a little bit about all of these, mostly BD plus C, and then maybe 20% O plus M. But there might be a couple of questions about homes or neighborhood development or interiors. Um, so be mindful of that. And more on that. Most of the questions you guys had were, you have tips and tricks for exam, which will be the brunt of this study session. Um, and then just more high level overview of the different certification levels. So 4 certification levels for all of these different programs, and a little bit more on that later. So let's get to the questions. Again, keep them coming in over the next hour. At the end, we're going to go through and answer all of your questions, or those questions coming in on YouTube Live. Um, so first question is from Ramona. What's the difference between the LEED Green Associate and AP? Now, apologize for room's sake here. You're actually, and this is a bonus question you might actually see on your exam. You're actually not supposed to abbreviate LEED GA as this. Um, eh, USGBC is very specific about their brand, and provide guidelines and even ask questions on your exam because they want to help grow their brand and promote what they're doing. And so they want you to only spell out Lee Green Associate completely, or abbreviate it after the C in associate. Um, but uh, that's just a little bonus question you might see on your exam. But to answer Ramona's question, the Lee Green Associate, there's 3 tiers to the credentials that can be earned, to kind of set yourself in the industry as a green building expert. The first tier is the LEED Green Associate. That's where everyone has to start. In order to take one of the LEED AP with specialty exams to earn these tier 2 credentials, you must first be a LEED Green Associate. Now, you do have the option to take both exams at the same time. I think you save $50 on the exam fee. That would be about the only reason. I'd recommend do one at a time. Focus your studies broad. It's on the League Green Associate, and then it gives you some experience, and you've seen kind of how they test and what the test is like. That'll help you as you're studying for an AP. You'll kind of know better what to study and how to study. But AP level exams are much more focused on a specific rating system, and much more detail oriented. But Lead Green Associate, that's where everybody should start. Then you can become a lead AP. Then after about 10 years of experience in the industry, really promoting lead and green building and sustainability, you can apply to be a lead fellow. So there's 3 different tiers here. And that's the main difference. Is this is the first tier, just the general high level. This is more specific, and this says I'm a master of maybe the BD plus C rating system, and I can oversee projects and really know the ins and outs of that specific rating system. So hopefully that answers your question, Ramona. If you have more, please keep them coming with the questions feature here. Um, question number 2, the cost of the exam, the registration, available dates. What can you tell us about that? So first, the cost of the exam. We'll start there. It's $250 for most people if you're not a USGBC member. Now that's talking about your company. So companies can become USGBC members, pay an annual fee, um, and if so, then it's $200 if your company is a member. So you can look that up, check as you're signing up for your exam. It might save you some money there. Recently, they've started allowing students, that's college students or younger, to take the exam for only $100. So that's a great bargain for this valuable credential. And veterans actually, after a rebate, can test for free. So if you're a veteran, um, maybe don't study as hard. You can take free exams. No, that's bad advice. Um, so that's the cost. Also, want to throw in that after you pass the test and become a League Green Associate, and that's you'll find out feedback instantly after you take your exam. They'll shoot you an email within an hour and let you know your score, and if you pass or not, then you're a LEED Grant Associate. But you do have to keep up with your education and earn 15 hours of continuing education every 2 years. You can do that through working on LEED projects. Or a couple other ways. Most people just will learn through maybe lunch and learn events or courses. We have over 100 courses that you can watch online that teach you about some of the latest concepts that are emerging, and you can earn those hours. But then they require an $85 maintenance fee every 2 years. So just heads up there. That's what you're getting into as a LEED Grant Associate. Let's see, available dates for the exam. So the available dates are pretty much anytime, anywhere. We recommend you test in the morning. The way it works is USGBC has partnered with Prometric testing centers. They offer a lot of professional exams through these computer lab testing centers. They're all over. I'm here in Atlanta currently, and I think there's three within the city limits. So most major cities have multiple Prometric testing centers. You can look them up online. And also you can schedule a date pretty much anytime as long as it's, a few weeks out or more. As you get closer to, the day you want to take it, the slots start filling up and maybe you don't have as much flexibility. But there's my one of my first exam tips is sign up for early in the morning, maybe sign up a couple of months out. If you're studying now and you know you want to take it in 2 or 3 months, go ahead and pick a date. I think up to a couple of days or up to a week you can reschedule if something comes up. But it's good to have that date kind of hanging over your head to help motivate you to study and keep up the pace of your studies. So essentially, what it looks like, you're going to go in. It's a 2 hour. They give you a 2 hour time limit to take a 100 question multiple choice exam. A few of the questions are maybe pick two or pick three. They'll tell you specifically if it's a pick two or pick three. Otherwise, most of them are, A, B, C, D, multiple choice questions. You can work through, cross off some wrong answers, highlight some things on your questions, but this will be done in a computer lab. It's closed book. You can't bring any notes. They do give you scrap paper to jot down notes and a calculator that you can use. Good news is you don't need to do a lot of calculations, maybe one or two max. Again, more on that in a little bit, but essentially you can register when and where you'd like. Um, Most people do better in the morning, especially don't sign up for an exam after a long day of work where your brain is tired or exhausted, you're low energy, you need to focus and keep a good pace for 2 hours to get through all 100 questions and still have time at the end to go back and review some of the ones you maybe marked. A few other tips here about the test. We'll talk more about test tips at the end, but you can mark and come back and reference things and questions and help jog your memory. So that's nice. All right, next question. And we're moving at a pretty good pace here. So please do think of some questions if you don't have any right now and chat those over. We want to answer as many questions as we can now. Um, so which topics to study? This is a great question, and I have a few slides about this. And also, I'm gonna point you to some free resources like Candidate Handbook that really breaks it down even further. But just in general, let's start really broad and kind of focus in a little bit here. Um, like I mentioned before, you're going to need to know kind of all the rating systems, how LEED works, the fees, things along those lines, but kind of the main concepts. You don't need to know a textbook definition of whatever the key term is. You need to have your own definition because you're going to have some applied kind of problem solving asked of you during your exam. So things like, who makes up a LEED project team, who's involved, and that's going to be, the more people, the merrier. It's a more of an integrated process with LEED. You get feedback from the vendors, maybe the cleaners, during the design process when you're picking out carpets, and they can tell you, no, that carpet's so hard to clean. Choose this carpet. Um, Things like that. The owner, the basis of design, and then everything from the certification process. How much does it cost? How do you sign up? What do you use? Who reviews it? The GBCI. And then credit strategy is a big one. How do the credits benefit or take away from other concepts? and public outreach. So now that's super broad. So let's get a little more focused. Now this is found in the candidate handbook, which USGBC offers for free. We also I'll share a link here in a minute with we've actually got some extra study tools to go along with this. And it'll be super helpful. But this is a snapshot of um, exactly the amount of questions from each of the different sections. So let's go through this. This is very important. You'll see this in the candidate handbook, but here it is for you on this slide. The lead process. The most questions you're going to have are about how much does it cost? How do you sign up? Which rating system do you use for this example building, things along those lines. So most questions about that, where I mentioned the um, lead green associate abbreviation, how to properly abbreviate it, that those are questions that are going to fall here in the lead process. Now, integrative strategies, this is one of the harder categories of questions, 8 questions here. This is more like along the lines of if you do this concept, is it going to benefit or take away from this other lead concept? And we call it synergies. How do they positively or negatively affect each other? For example, it's great to bring in fresh outside air into your building because people are going to be healthier. They're going to have more oxygen, less carbon dioxide buildup. They're not going to get as sleepy. They're going to be more alert, more productive. But the negative trade off, the negative synergy there is when you bring in more outside air, let's say it's the summertime, you're going to have to then cool more air and use more energy to refrigerate and cool that air for your building occupants. So there's some trade-offs. A lot of them are positive, um, and positively, you know, benefit each other, but there are some that are negative. So you have to figure out based on your situation and your project which is a better strategy. And then the most questions kind of come from general sections. So leads broken up into different what they call categories. So location and transportation is a category. There's going to be 7 questions coming from this category specifically. So it's good to reference this, maybe come back and make sure you've covered all these sections and read up and studied on them. Another fun fact here, which will really help your confidence in the exam. If you notice here, it says 85 scored questions, 15 unscored beta questions. You might be wondering what that means or what that's all about. Well, what they're doing here is they're throwing in 15 new questions. These tests have been around for a long time and they're always trying to improve them. Um, and so they're asking questions to test the audience and get feedback. Is this a good question to ask or not? And so actually 15 of the questions you see don't count against you. They're unscored. So if you got them completely wrong, then it's not going to affect your score. Your score's on a scale of 0 to 200 with a 170 being passing. So essentially an 85 percentile or more. So essentially you want to get the questions that are scored right. Some don't count against you. So now this is great for your confidence because no, if you come across a question that says this study, I know on my exam, I got some kind of question about a Harvard study. And I said, you know what, I've never read this Harvard study. I don't even know where they talked about this. Well, uh, that was probably a question that was thrown out. So they're testing beta questions for future exams. The good news is if you see something really difficult, just mark it. Don't waste too much time. Keep a good pace, and then move on to your next questions. Come back to it at the end, but don't let it affect your confidence. If you get 3 or 4 of these hard questions right out of the gate, don't let it affect your confidence. Maybe they're not even scored. Keep going, stay positive, keep a good pace, and then you'll have time at the end if you have a decent pace to go back and spend as much time as you want on the really difficult ones that you've marked. Um, all right, so just in general, so more on this on kind of what areas to study. Um, LEED is set up to promote people, profit, and planet. It's a fancy way to say it. LEED calls it economic growth, social progress, and environmental stewardship. But essentially, we want to make sure that the buildings that we're designing, building, operating, maintaining are healthier for the people in it. The They make economical sense. They save energy, they save water, they save resources, and they're good for the local environment, ecosystems. They're sustainable for the planet. So essentially, all the concepts are set up around with these main goals, and they actually elaborate more. The USGBC elaborates more on their 7 goals to promote transformation. These are their main 7 goals, and I think kind of in order of importance. So the main thing they're trying to do is reverse global climate change. Now, this is super important. This is actually worth coming back to and as you're studying or taking a snapshot now and adding it to your notes to study, because this essentially is a guide to know. One of the tricky parts about this test is that they're often going to give you multiple answers that are lead concepts that are right, but you always have to choose the best answer. So that's a good tip, is always read every answer. Even if the first one you say, yeah, that's it, I know. Don't just mark it and move on. Read all the answers, because there may be a better um, answer. And so how do you determine, well, what's the best answer? What's a better answer? It's really referencing their goals in order of importance. So the first main goal is to reverse global climate change. And number one, primarily, even maybe jot this down. Number one is carbon emissions, because that has the biggest impact on global warming. So that's any kind of concept that has to do with alternative transportation, keeping roads off, the cars off the road, excuse me, to and from the building, or reducing energy. That's energy, electricity that you use is directly tied to carbon emissions in most cases through nuclear power plants, or however it's created, coal plants, um, I should say. And so number one would be, um, does this answer save a lot of carbon emissions? If so, it's going to be the best answer. You can feel confident, choose that one and move on. Or is it, maybe it's ozone depletion potentials? Maybe it has to do with refrigerants, or some kind of other things that reverse global climate change. Then that's maybe the second best answer. Then we go into promoting individual health and well-being. Now that's kind of vague also. What I would boil this down into is air quality. So in energy and atmosphere, um, indoor air quality, basically the more fresh air, this would be, bringing in an extra ventilation for extra oxygen is going to be a very sustainable feature. It's going to help promote human health and productivity and well-being. And therefore that is probably going to be a better answer than one lower on the list, like sourcing materials locally, or doing a case study for some innovation points to educate people on what you've done at your building, things along those lines. So this is an order of importance, in order of best answer to maybe right answer or good answer, but we always want to choose the best answer. And so this is good to come back and reference. All right, so on to the next question. Okay. Oh, I've got a question. This one's probably coming from YouTube here. I'll just interrupt real quick. Does a lead fellow have a specific titling similar to tier two? So not exactly sure what this question is asking. Maybe you can elaborate, but a lead fellow is called a lead fellow. So for example, a lead AP has a specialty. It's not just a lead AP. Originally, the exams were for lead APs just generally, but now they've broken it into the Green Associate and maybe the lead AP BD plus C, or the lead AP O plus M, or the lead AP ID plus C. So no, there's not that kind of labeling with the lead fellow. With the lead fellow, you're just a lead fellow, not a lead fellow BD plus C or ID plus C. Really, that's an application and a case by case. You've had experience with green building for 10 years and or more, and you're really promoting lead or green buildings, or you're really passionate about it, then you can apply and send an application to become a lead fellow. But there's about 82,000 lead professionals, only a handful of lead fellows. Most are green associates and stop there. The next most popular would be the lead BD plus C credential, followed by the lead O plus M credential. So thanks for that question, and hopefully we have more coming in there. So back to uh, Amir's question. Hopefully that's how to pronounce your name, Amir. How do we calculate energy demand in countries like Pakistan, where we don't have online data of buildings? So, good question. Now, this isn't going to be very relevant for your exam so much, as more a lead project you may be working on. Um, because most of the questions on your exams are general. Consider the average building, maybe in the United States, is kind of where LEED is most popular and grown. So that's what you kind of want to picture. If they give you an example of a building, assume it's like mild climate, middle of the US. But for practical purposes, just to touch on this and answer your question real quickly, um, some areas that don't have as much building data or maybe access to Energy Star, the primary way, and this applies to O plus M buildings, existing buildings, operation and maintenance, where, and you'll get, like I said, about 20% of the questions, maybe 15, about kind of some O plus M strategies, some existing building, mostly 80% new construction, a little bit O plus M. But for existing buildings, like the existing office space building I'm in now, um, the the amount of credits you get in the energy and atmosphere category are tied to your Energy Star score. So the higher your Energy Star score, the more points you get in this category. I think that's kind of what Amir is asking. If Energy Star is not accessible in my area or a country like Pakistan, then what do we do? The answer is it's very similar. It's just the US GBC has their own formula. You would do it the same way you would apply for an Energy Star certification, where you input your utility bills over the past 12 months, and you input your information of your building, like your square footage and your building type and your location, and basically it calculates the score for you through Energy Star. Or in the case if you don't have Energy Star, you would do it in the same manner. It's just an alternative compliance path in which you submit your data, similar, same data, it's just a different formula, and they give you your energy score. So that's how it work um, in your situation. um, Paul had asked, what are the qualifications for LEED ND? So ND stands for neighborhood development. um, so in order to become a LEED ND, personally, people get accredited, buildings get certified. There's a little bonus question you might see on the exam. um, in order to get LEED ND accredited as a person, then the only prerequisite is that you first become a LEED Green Associate. Again, you could take both tests at the same time, but you would have to ultimately pass both tests. So you took both tests at the same time and you passed the ND but failed the Green Associate. Well, you can retake the Green Associate, and once you pass it, you're an ND. But unless you pass the Green Associate first, you're not going to be a LEED ND. And so neighborhood developments, like here in Atlanta, we have a really nice one, Atlantic Station, where there's a whole bunch of LEED buildings in an area. There's a lot of diverse uses. So people, instead of having to get in their car in their lunch break and drive to lunch or run errands to the post office, you can actually just walk around because it's a whole LEED neighborhood. Um, so David had asked, and I think David's studying for his AP BD plus C, which a lot of this information today will hopefully be helpful. What do you need to know for envelope and municipal building codes? So for your exam, you don't need to know, especially for the Green Associate exam, you need to know like the building envelope, is the outside, the skin of the building. And you also need to know it's the first thing you want to really look at and make sure you get right, because you can lose a lot of energy by having a poor building envelope. You could just be running the heater or the air conditioning more than you need to if there's gaps or improper insulation in your building envelope. So that's what you need to know for your exam. For the BD plus C, there might be like one calculation about calculating related to your envelope, but it's not going to be too detailed there, especially for the Green Associate. You just kind of need to know the high level concept. What is a building envelope? It's that very outside of your building, the skin of the building, kind of. And municipal building codes, you need to know for your exam that if a local building code is more stringent than LEED, you have to do the whichever is more stringent. So even if it's LEED says, this is the bar, you actually, if code's stricter, then you have to do that. In most cases, LEED is more stringent, but not always the case. Like in California, they have very strict guidelines about what kind of materials to use and air quality, and um, and so actually LEED has adopted some of their SQUAC mid, is the acronym for the South Coastal Air Quality Management Department, kind of municipal codes. So that's what you kind of need to know for your exam. BD plus C, maybe a little bit more in depth is all. And then the brunt of, we're about halfway through our hour here. The brunt of what everyone, I think, the feedback they gave is they want tips on the exam, how to pass the exam, and test taking tips. So I've got a lot of those for you. But then please keep your questions coming in. I'm not seeing a whole lot of questions coming in through the questions feature here. So please, if you any and all questions are very welcome. So let's get into some tips and tricks. And what other questions that you have remaining. So I've jotted down about 10 tips here, and I've got a few more slides to go over, but let's just kind of go through these first. So the first tip is when you sit down in the Prometric testing center, a few tips there. One, when you sign up, make sure you use the exact name that's on your license. For example, my brother's name is Charles, his proper name, but he goes by Charlie. Well, it says Charles on his driver's license, so they're very stringent, and you have to actually put exactly what's on your driver's license or your identification that you're using. They're going to check that. You can't bring anything in. You have to show your pockets, but they do give you scrap paper, and so when you go in, you have 10 minutes to do a tutorial of the testing software on the computer and get familiar with, forward back marking. You can actually put a line through question or answers, excuse me, that are incorrect, and that helps you focus in on, okay, it's just between A and B, what's the best answer, and cross out C and D if they're incorrect, things like that. So use a few minutes there, get familiar, but then before you go in and start, once you start your exam, your clock starts running for 2 hours. Before you do that, do what we call a brain dump, where maybe you've memorized a handful of numbers. There's only about a dozen different numbers you need to memorize. It's mostly high level, but that there's four ASHRAE standards that are referenced by LEED quite a bit: 90.1, 62.1, things like that. And so maybe you want to jot those down and say, okay, 90.1, that's energy; 62.1, that's ventilation; 52.2, that's um, um, air filtration. So jot those down, or whatever you are struggling with or think you don't want to get confused, because what that'll do is it'll give you a lot of confidence going in before you start getting confused by a question where they use two different numbers that are related to different concepts. You don't get them mixed up. If you have some stuff written down on your scrap paper during that first 10-minute brain dump, you can reference it, and you don't have to second guess yourself because you didn't have that kind of tricky influence of the question. And now you're torn. Was it 20 or 30? I know it's one of these two, but and they have 20 and 30 as answers. Then that brain dump will help. You can reference and give you some extra confidence and extra time to take a few deep breaths before you get going. So that's the first test tip. Um, Second one is keep your studies high level. I mentioned before, don't worry about knowing the exact definition. Most of it's not just straight up memory recall. Most of it's the concept. You can apply it. They'll give you a scenario, a situation where you choose which is the best lead concept to use or incorporate in this given situation. So keep your studies high level. Just have your own definition of all the key terms, um, and then reference some of the free study tools that will give you. Make sure you kind of covered everything. Uh, but don't get too detail oriented and worry about, okay, this is SS credit 5. You don't have to memorize that. You just need to know, okay, SS credit 5 goes in the sustainable sites category. And really you just need to focus a few concepts maybe don't make sense, like the indoor air quality versus a couple of things. If it doesn't make common sense as you're going through, just pay attention that it fits into this category. So that's more important than memorizing, SS credit 5 is this and SS credit 6 is that. You don't need to do all that. You just need to know the concepts. Tip number 3, don't memorize too many numbers. We've got a cheat sheet with our study tools, and it's got kind of the main numbers listed down. Um, but MPRs, minimum program requirements, the lead fees associated, some things like that, the hash rate standards, the numbers related to years, the EP Act of 92, Montreal Protocol 2010, a few numbers like that, but don't worry about the outdoor, the threshold for bringing in enough ventilation is, if it's too detailed of a number, you don't have to memorize it. Just those numbers about fees, maybe water flush flow rates, things like that. A handful of numbers, but don't get caught up there. So that's tip number 3. Tip number 4: read each question twice. Now this is a simple one, but a lot of people, I'm sure, miss a question because they miss the word "not" or "isn't" in the question. And so what I would like to do personally is just read each question twice and make sure I'm figuring out what they're asking before I get into the answer. So it does two things: make sure you don't misread it and miss a word that's there, completely changes, the question, like "not" or "isn't." But secondly, you're saying, okay, what are they asking, and you're trying to develop an answer in your head before you start reading the answers, and you can kind of know where to go. So simple tip, but I think an effective one. Tip number 5: read all answers. I think I covered this briefly before. You're always looking for the best answer. So, which answer reduces the most carbon emissions? That's what you want to start with. If nothing else, find any answer that reduces carbon emissions through even um, alternative transportation means, locating, just locating a project in an urban area is going to save a ton of carbon emissions because people aren't going to have to drive from 50 miles away. They can use alternative transportation. They can drive a short 2-mile commute. So things like that are actually going to be a better answer. But definitely make sure you read all the answers. Here's a little give me. A lot of exams have this question: what does LEED stand for? The acronym LEED: Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design. So don't overlook that. Tip number 7: how do you properly abbreviate U.S. Green Building Council, US GBC? Here on the screen, you see the two ways they want you to abbreviate it. Don't ever spell out United States Green Building Council completely. That's actually incorrect because they're a global organization. They just want to be known as the U.S. Green Building Council, or just USGBC. And then we talked a little bit about Lee Green Associate. Only correct way to abbreviate it, unless you're spelling it out completely, is to put the period after the C. Here's one that's maybe a little tricky to grasp at first, so I put it on here. Tip number 8: certified versus certified. So on one of the slides, we had the 4 levels of certification. It goes certified, silver, gold, and platinum. Now, the certified with a capital C is referring to that point range of between 40 and 49 points. So this here, if you ever capitalize the C when talking about LEED certified or certification, well, it would be certified, not certified, is a capital C. That means 40 to 49 points. Or if you're saying maybe a LEED platinum building, you're talking about it in a press release. You say we earned a LEED certification, and at the highest mark, LEED platinum. Then you would say lowercase c. Otherwise, if you use the capital C, it wouldn't make sense. You're saying we got between 40 and 49 points, and we got over 80 points. So that's a little confusing bit, but very often they ask that question. Um, Tip number 9 is probably my favorite. And this applies for kind of any kind of exam or test or anything you're trying to memorize, is use memorization techniques or tips so that you can more easily and more effectively memorize and recall the information you're trying to. Um, Let me give you some examples here. So professional memory folks, they use really weird associations in their head to memorize things, and they can do it very quickly and effectively, recall a lot of information. But so, for example, I mentioned there's 4 ASHRAE standards that LEED really uses as kind of guidelines for different concepts. And let's start with ASHRAE 55. ASHRAE 55 is about thermal comfort. So here's a way to use a memory technique to help memorize this. I think about when I'm cold, my body language. I tend to cross my arms. You're trying to get that warmth from your arms close to your core. And I think 5 fingers on each hand, 2 hands, 55, ASHRAE 55, and thermal comfort. So there's an association there. That's the way your memory works, is by making neuro associations and neuron connections in your brain. And so weird associations like this help you memorize things. So more examples. ASHRAE 52.2 is about air filtration. The way I memorize that is I think, okay, 52, there's 52 playing cards in a standard deck of playing cards. And that's, thin paper similar to maybe an air filter. Um, and so I think, okay, ASHRAE 52, 52 cards, you know, paper, air filtration, air filters. So just a couple examples of how to make weird associations. Anything you can do, especially for trying to memorize numbers or things that are more difficult, maybe make a weird association. I mean, an example I've heard of professional memory techniques is people would picture, like a pink zebra or weird, really odd, strange things that it helps your memory, then associate that pink zebra with whatever association. So hopefully that's a helpful test tip for you. On to number 10, and then we have a few more slides. Download our free resources if you haven't already. We've got a couple of good resources here. Let's see. Here we are. And we'll go to the slide and then we'll go back one. So what we put together is the one link that when you click it, it'll download these three things straight to your computer. You have to be on a computer. But what you'll do is just go to this page. I think you can see my screen here. gbs.com/exam-prep. And then on this page here, there's a link to click here and then download these resources. So if you go there and do that, what you're going to get is there's a study plan. It gives you some recommended ways to kind of track and keep up your studies to knock it out in a month. But the candidate handbook on that slide, we saw that, but it also gives you good information about how to sign up, where to sign up, and the entire process. So it's only about 14 pages, but it's all about the exam. There's that, there's a study plan, but this one I think is very valuable and will definitely help you with your studies. So this is why I'm recommending you go ahead and do this, after this webinar, um, or go ahead and jot down this URL, pull it up in a tab, and then come back to this. But we have a glossary of about 257 key terms here, and it's got definitions with it. So what I would do is just have this at the end. I would do your regular studies like you normally would, or use our other exam prep tools, watch the videos and the listen to MP3s and flashcards and practice tests, all that good stuff. But at the end, maybe come back and say, do I know all of these key terms? Use that as more of a checklist instead of directing your studies. It's good to know about all the concepts and learn them first, but this maybe is a good helpful checklist to kind of come back and make sure, oh, you know what? What's this term? I never read about this. I haven't studied this. Let me go ahead and read back up on it now and learn that key term. Those are most of the key terms they ask questions about. um, a little bit more on that. Here's a kind of a snapshot of a test. Choose to. Um, I think we already kind of talked about this. The one thing I didn't talk about on the slide is use other questions to jog your memory. So if you keep a good pace and you go through your hour and a half, you've done your 100 questions, but maybe you mark five and you're like, wow, these five I'm not sure about. I really need to spend more time on them. We have time. Maybe mark other questions just to mark, and you can actually highlight bits of questions. So you should go in here and highlight if one question is asking a question about something and it says um, and it spells out an acronym, like SquawkNet or ASHRAE, you maybe want to highlight that because there might be another question that asks about, especially if you've seen another question before and you can go back and double check. But that's a good way to kind of get a few extra points. Most people, if I pass, if they put in enough studies, especially using our study tools. But if anybody does fail, it's usually by a few points. I've heard so many people, I missed about 1 point or 2 points. So every point really helps, and I would recommend use maximum time at the end. Don't go back into any questions that you felt confident about, because your intuition, your first choice is usually the best choice. So don't be changing answers unless you have a you've seen, in another question where it spelled it out and you've corrected yourself. But don't second guess your first in, instinctive guess at the question. But you can go back and mark different questions to jog your memory. So there's a good tip there. Here's a look at the scorecard. I just included this. A lot of people are asking about what guides their studies and things like that. So here's new construction scorecard. This is a good checklist after you've been studying for a while to come back and say, okay, now I know, okay, think about no smoking in the building. That's a prerequisite for indoor air quality. Just know where they fit in. You don't need to know, okay, location and transportation for version 4 BD plus C is 16 points. You don't need to know any of these numbers. I mean, it might be good to know that there's 100 possible lead credits and 10 innovation points, but outside of that, you don't need to know there's 11 in water efficiency and 13 in energy and atmosphere, because it's different between the different rating systems. There's more or less based on your specific project type. But it's good to know and go back and say, like light pollution reduction. This is one I thought was confusing. So this has to do with your site, and what we don't want to do is point lights up at the sky. It affects the birds and insects navigation at night. It's called light pollution. So you might think, okay, well, that's, you know, that fits in here with interior lighting and daylight and all these lighting things in indoor environment quality. But you got to think, okay, this is actually on the outside, sustainable sites category. So any of these that are a little bit counterintuitive, just come back and use this scorecard to make sure you're organized and know that light pollution is a sustainable sites category concept. So that's what I wanted to show you there. Oh, it looks like we've got some more questions over here. Let me give me a second here and pull up these questions larger. Is there a way to identify, thanks Enver for your question, is there a way to identify the beta questions from the graded questions on the exam? Great question. No, there's not. I mean, we help people prepare for these exams, and we don't even know. In the instance where I was asked about a Harvard study, um, I just, that's not in the lead manuals and the reference guides. Like, that was from left field, and I think that was thrown out. I got a 197 out of 200, so I really aced the test. But there's no way that some of the questions might be weighted more or less. So maybe one question's worth 3 points towards your 200, one's worth one, and they don't tell us that. That's the behind the scenes they calculate. But the main point here is, if it's super hard or you just have no clue, don't worry about it then and there. Just mark it, skip over it, and come back. I mean, it's best to answer all questions, and maybe you run short on time in 5 minutes, so you haven't wasted that valuable time trying to worry about a question that's too difficult. Do all the ones you're confident about first, mark them. If you have to, come back. It's always best, and here's a good test tip: always guess. Even at the end, if you're running out of time and you have 5 questions, go through, click, 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 guess an answer. It doesn't count against you if it counts against you if you mark nothing. So it's not like you're scored out of the questions you answered. They all count, whether you guess at it or not. So always guess at least um, the correct answer. Um, don't leave any questions blank. Hopefully that's helpful there. Thanks for your question. Uh, so I'm getting near the end of my slides here. We got about 10 minutes still. So please send in the questions that you have. Want to be sure and address those now if I can. Okay, so while we're waiting on a few more questions to come in, um, just a couple pieces of business here. If you haven't heard about the Well AP, it's very fast growing rating system. I think maybe there was a question I forgot to throw in here about Well, but so Well is a new building standard similar to LEED. It's growing very fast, kind of like LEED has, but it's about health and wellness. The Well is not an acronym for anything; it just stands for well and wellness. And so it's about um, making buildings that are very healthy and a good environment for productivity, for building occupants, and less they miss less work and they're more focused. So we help people prepare for those exams. Of course, the Lead Green Associate and the Lead APs. And then also we have continuing education courses. So my email is on one of these first slides. It's michael.cichetti@GBES. Go ahead and email me. I'm director of sales. So if you're looking at some of these tools, I'd like to help you out, see if there's any discounts coming up or what we've got going on. But just wanted to mention that so you guys all know after you pass your exam, keep in touch with us, and we've got great content. We've got a really cool podcast that I would highly recommend for career advice, especially if you're very passionate about sustainability or starting to get into it. We get a lot of expert speakers. Even the CEO of USGBC was on our podcast as a guest talking about kind of the future of the USGBC and things like that. So that's gbs.com/podcast. But then we have great education courses to earn those 15 hours that you need. And I also wanted to share a 10% off coupon code if anybody still is needing more of our lead study tools. Through our website, gbs.com. There's a code here, LEED GA Study Sesh, and that'll take 10% off of all our LEED and well and even CE products, after you pass. So there's a code for you. And email me if you need additional help with questions or discounts, things along those lines. But let me check and see what kind of questions we have coming in. I'll give you some more test tips if I can in the meantime, but please send over some questions. So let me see what else I can pull up here that will be most helpful. I'm going to pull up this Word document I've been working on here with some exam tips specifically. Let's see what we've got here. But please chat me over some more questions in your questions feature. Um, and I'm be more than happy to answer those. All right, so we've talked about a lot of these tips. Now, this will be really helpful. I've really outlined here. And oh, one more piece of business here. So this recording, thanks for joining and watching. Actually, some maybe have signed up and haven't been able to join. So the recording, we're going to email out a link to this recording if you signed up, so you can come back and reference this. Maybe after you've been studying for a while, you want to come back to these specific test tips. But here and now, I'm going to cover some of the numbers. These are personally the only numbers I would worry about memorizing. Outside of these numbers, I wouldn't waste the time trying to memorize them. Now that may be different for the LEED AP exam. You might have to know more detailed numbers and thresholds of the different credits and things along those lines. But for the LEED Green Associate exam specifically, um, there's about a dozen. Oops, there's about a dozen numbers here to memorize. So let's go through those. I think that'll be very valuable for you. Um, there's some numbers related to the MPRs, the minimum program requirements. That's like a project has to be at least 1,000 gross square feet if it's pursuing BD plus C or O plus M, or IDC needs to be 250 square feet. Those are the numbers I'm talking about there. Memorize, actually just memorize even the other ones that aren't numbers. Memorize all the MPRs. There's only 3 for each of the rating, there's 3 of them for each of the rating systems. So be sure to know those. Those are super important. That's, do I meet this to play the game? Essentially, you can't LEED certify a houseboat, or a mobile home because it has to be in fixed property, things like that. So memorize those. The 4 ASHRAE standards here: 90.1, 62.1, 55, 52.2. Now, when I say memorize, I don't mean memorize the language for ASHRAE 90.1 and all the numbers and thresholds. Memorize ASHRAE 90.1 relates to energy. That's what you need to memorize. 90.1, think energy. So the question will be about, which ASHRAE standard, is the guidelines for your energy score. Okay, energy, I think ASHRAE 90.1 or something along those lines. 62.1, that's air ventilation. That's a little tricky with 52.2, which is air filtration. So ventilation is talking about bringing in fresh outside air, bringing in clean air, whereas 52.2 is filtering that air. What kind of MERV filters? MERV 13 is higher number than MERV 8. It's more filtration power, more densely filtering the air. So that there's an example of a negative synergy where, advanced air filtration makes for better air quality. You catch more of the contaminants, the dust, and the stuff in the air. But the negative trade-off is maybe it takes more energy to pump and push air through that air filter. So negative synergy. 55, think thermal comfort. I use that memory technique example with, 5 fingers on each hand and you cross your arms if you're cold, thermal comfort. Okay, going through these numbers here. EP Act of 1992. So there's numbers. That's kind of what the baseline's been since 92 of use this much water, for building code. And then LEED says you need 20% better than outdoor, I mean, indoor, and 30% better than this this baseline for outdoor water use for your landscaping watering. And so you need to know those numbers, the 20, 30%. You need to know this 1992. You need to know the EP Act, not EPA Act. EPA is the program behind Energy Star, a great program. Recommend anybody that works on a existing building out there looking to take this test on this webinar. First step, start with Energy Star before LEED. Even Energy Star, very valuable and very cost effective compared to LEED. Um, but it's great to benchmark your energy and know where you're at, how you're doing. Are you doing well? Are you doing poor? It helps you track from year to year. Why did we use twice as much energy this year? There's got to be something wrong with our equipment. Let's figure that out. Um, so, anyways, went on a tangent. Those numbers were related to flush and flow rates, then fees, credit interpretation rulings, project registration fees, all those fees. You need to memorize those fees. How much does it cost, for this building type? So that's going to be probably the trickiest kind of numbers to memorize. Then the certification levels, it seems pretty straightforward, but don't be confused between, it's a 10-point jump from certified to silver and silver to gold, but it's a 20-point jump from gold to platinum. So be mindful of that. It's not just straightforward 10 credits each tier of certification. Um, Location of transportation, and also know that it starts at 40. That's very important too. Um, Location of transportation, there's some half a mile, quarter mile, related to rail lines or bus stops and diverse uses. You have 10 diverse uses, or maybe even if you do any kind of calculations, it'll be one of two: an FTE or a density calculation based on your square footage of your building and the surrounding buildings, within that 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 circle surrounding your building, that radius. That's the word I'm searching for, radius. All right. And then MERV filtration, I mentioned MERV 13, MERV 8. Just know, which is more filtration. It might help with some questions. And then there's a couple of Squawkman rules that we cover in our study tools and ISO standards. Just kind of know those, like 1444, relating to recycling. Don't memorize them exactly, but same as ash rate, kind of know what they relate to. And then finally, maybe some numbers around Montreal Protocol and phasing out CFCs and harmful refrigerants. We want to get away from those and more natural carbon based or chemicals that don't deplete the ozone. So very, very good tips there on numbers. So outside of these numbers that I mentioned, don't waste your time memorizing them. Just memorize those and then learn a concept. So it's not too bad if you're a good high level type person. If you're very detail oriented, you're going to do better on the AP exams. But for green level, I mean, green associate, keep it high level and keep it broad and just know your own definition of the key terms. Let's see what else we got here. Covered most of these. Um, those are most of my test tips, and we're doing really well on time. So let me check these other questions here. If there's any that have come in, doesn't look like there has been a lot. So let me go back to my contact information. Now's a good time to jot that down. I like to think I'm a friendly and helpful guy. So if you and very responsive. So if you have additional questions, maybe you forgot to ask here, if you need any help at all, here's my email address, michael.cichetti@gbes.com. Want to help you any way I can. So take note of that. Let me know if you need any further assistance with these credentials or maintaining them. Thanks so much for your questions and your participation today. Really appreciate it. Hopefully you've learned a lot and now have a better feeling about going into this exam. It's not too bad, but take it serious because you hate to miss it by a point or two and then have to retake the test and pay that fee again to go in and take your test. Um, but yeah. Oh, finally, there's some more resources too on our website if needed. I would recommend maybe checking that out if you're still looking for more. Of course, we have great study tools that you can purchase, but also under our Let me pull it up and I'll show you. We have an FAQ section on our website, and so, oops. Oh, by the way, just today only is the last day we're doing a huge sale. Um, Only twice a year we offer about 30% code discount on all our products. And so if you need additional study tools, I wouldn't waste any time. I would get them today. We're celebrating in remembrance of um, the holidays. We're offering 30% off, and with a code we remember. But what I want to show you here is under under resources. I'm sorry, clicked on the wrong thing. Under resources here, we're going to actually separate this out. I just noticed this the other day that we should have free resources, but it's under the FAQ. So we're going to break that out for you so you can find it more easily. But we do have some additional study tools here, kind of what I've went over, or in that link that from before, but then for other credentials too. So I think David was studying for the BD+C exam. Maybe you want to come here, David, and check out some of these other free tools, the BD+C candidate handbook and checklist and things like that. So yeah, hopefully everyone finds this very valuable. Thanks so much for your questions, and best of luck with your exams. You guys have this. It's not too bad, and it's totally worth it to put in the time and study, because this is a professional credential. You can add it to your name, your resume. But it's just great knowledge, especially if you're in construction, architecture, or manage a building. This is good stuff that we need to know, and we're not even to the net zero, the net positive buildings yet, but it's important we take these kind of steps to in the right direction. So yeah, thanks everyone. Any other questions, feel free to follow up via email or reach us at customercare@gbs.com also, and best of luck with your studies.